Today, we're going to be talking about identify risks and perform qualitative risk analysis, which are the second and third processes in the project risk management. Now, let's go very quickly over these processes. Now, of course, we've done the plan risk management before, so we know that this part is where we plan all the activities that are related to managing risk in a project. And then comes the identify risks, where we identify all the risks that we can identify, and we make sure that we document them in the risk register, and we document their characteristics so that we can use them later on to perform qualitative risk analysis and maybe quantitative risk analysis. Now, qualitative risk analysis, this is the process of prioritizing risks. We want to make sure we know which are the risks that have high priority in a project so that we can attend to them sooner than other risks. So this is qualitative. Then we move to quantitative risk analysis. Quantitative risk analysis is very similar to qualitative. We study both the probability of a risk happening and its impact on the project. However, in the quantitative study, of course, we have numbers. We use numbers, we make calculations so that we can select, guess which is the risks, where the risks are, and make decisions. The process of the planned risk responses is actually the process where we try to find options of enhancing the good risks, and we try to find options to mitigate the bad risks. Now, the good risks, of course, are called opportunities, and the bad risks are threats. It's a good way to think that risks are never negative all the time. We have positive risks and we have negative risks. And then we move to the last process, which is the monitor and control risks. This is the process where we actually monitor how our risks that have been identified in the identify risk stage, how are we doing with them? We see if there are any new risks that have come up. We try to, again, review the risks and see how many we can identify. We have to monitor and control the risk responses that we have planned and evaluate these responses. Are they effective? Did we choose a response to a risk that is effective, that is giving us results? So this is the monitor and control part. Now, as you know, for all the processes, we're going to do inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. Now, these are the inputs for the identify risk process. As you can see, you might say, oh, that's too many inputs, especially because this is the PMP 5. But when we try to look at them, we'll see that they're not that difficult. And you don't really need to memorize them without understanding what they mean. Now, why do we need to have a risk management plan? How does that help us in identifying risk? Why is it an input to a risk identification? It is an input because the risk management plan has so much information. First of all, it tells us about the methodology, I mean the approach and tools that we use in risk identification. Also, it will tell us about who does what in risk management. It means the roles and responsibilities of people. It also has lots of other information. For example, it will have information about the budget that has been assigned to the risk. So when we know the budget has been assigned, we also have an idea about how many people are going to be involved in the risk management. It has the timing and scheduling of the risk management. What does that mean? It will tell me when I have to identify risks, when I have to do qualitative analysis, when I have to go and review the risk register, etc. So all this information is in the risk management plan. And most important, it has the categories of risk in the form of an RBS reporting format of tracking the risk. Now, I'm going to give you this RBS photocopy. I really would like you to appreciate this because the RBS is very, very important, and you will see why. I think they're right. So, the risk management plan has this RBS. If you look at it, it has, like, you have the project. The project is divided into categories, okay? We have the technical, we have the external, organizational, and the project management. All the risks that could occur. For example, there might be a risk in the requirements for the technical category, in the technology, in the complexity, performances and reliability, etc. So keep this with you. It will give you an idea what you have to do when you want to identify risks. You could think about every single one of those later for later, okay? So keep it and you're going to use it later. Good. So we talked about the risk management plan. Now we are going to see what is the second input. It's the activity cost estimates. Now, you know that the project manager and his team would estimate how much each activity would cost. Now, there might be a risk involved in this if the estimation is not accurate or correct. So we will have to review it, because if the estimation is wrong, it will affect the budget and so on. Now, of course, you know that activity cost estimates are included in the cost management plan. And as we need activity cost estimates, we also need activity duration estimates. I want to know how much time has been allocated for each activity and check whether there's a risk in that or not. So this is also an input to identify risks. Maybe they did it wrong for some reason. Maybe they gave it a much shorter time than it needs, and this will pose a risk to the project. Now, the scope baseline, you know that the scope baseline is made of three things: scope statement, work breakdown structure, and work breakdown structure dictionary. Now, I'm interested in the scope statement because the scope statement has the assumptions. Whenever you have a project, you start with assumptions. What are assumptions? Assumptions are like hypotheses that you take as true. You start with assumptions that you believe are true and are correct. Okay? So, I need these. I need to know these. Now, stakeholder register, what does this tell me? Stakeholder register is, like you're going to see the risk register later, gives me information about all the stakeholders on the project. And its importance here is to tell me that I need to have stakeholders when I am identifying risks. Now, I need to tell you, of course, that the identification of risks, when I want to identify risks, who do you think should be with me? Who should do that? As we said, we have the cost management plan, schedule management plan, human resource management plan. All these give me information about the project, very important information. And when I study these plans, I can very well pinpoint some risks there. So I need to have these plans. Project documents, of course, all these inputs are project documents. Enterprise and environmental factors, this is a very important input. Now, any project has to function in a kind of environment. If you want your project to be successful, you have to understand the factors that affect the project. Now, the enterprise environmental factors, now you can have external factors. For example, you would have published data about risks that you can get. You can get academic studies, case studies. You can get articles in trade magazines that help you in your risk identification. Internally, enterprise environmental factors really is to actually understand the politics of your organization. How does the organization work? How do things happen? Okay, and the setup of the organization. The organizational process, I said, of course, every project manager has to do lessons learned at the end of each phase of the project or at the end of the project as a whole, when it's finished. So these documented lessons will really alert you to some risks, and you will be able to identify these risks. I would like to remind you that the risk identification process is really an iterative process. It means it doesn't happen just once, like we have it, as we said, the processes in order. It repeats. I do not identify my risks at the beginning, leave them and say, that's it, I've done my risk identification and then I can go on. You have to always review, because risks keep coming up. Why do risks keep coming up? As we talked about the environment, there are always changes. Things are changing, so I have to take care to always review my risks and add that to the risk register, as we are going to see later. Now, what are the tools? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask, what is the difference between risk and the issue?
Yes, good question. Now, as we're taught here, a risk is something, an event that could affect the outcome of the project or the objectives of a project, probably cost, timing, quality, etc. And when we talk about risk, we're looking into the future, right? We are trying to predict what events could happen that would affect our project. Now, when this risk happens, it then becomes an issue. So a good project manager does risk identification and analysis in order to avoid having issues.
So the value to make risk management from the first, to know
Exactly.
what is the issue, maybe when we
Of course.
see in the when we are running our project.
Yes, we have to be proactive.
So we should plan of this to didn't meet this problem in the future.
Yes, very well. That's exactly what it is. Very well expressed. That's exactly what it is. We do not wait for something to happen. We have to foresee what might happen and take the responses, we're going to call them, plan the appropriate responses to this risk. Right, what are the tools and techniques? Now, if you look at the inputs, remember we've said, okay, risk management plan, activity cost estimates, scope statement, all these are documents, right? So the first tool and technique is actually documentation reviews. I have to review all these documents. What does it mean to review the documents? First of all, I look at the content. I see, is everything that is written there correct? Is it accurate? And then I also have to see, are the assumptions there correct? Are the assumptions right, or do they need to be reviewed? I look at the quality of presenting the format. Do I have extra details that are not needed, or did I miss out on details? So all these have to be looked at again. And then, believe me, reading is very important. When you review the scope of your project, it means you review what you have to do, the work that you have to do. You might find some risks embedded here and there. Now, the second tool and technique is checklist analysis. What is a checklist analysis? Checklist analysis is not, a checklist is not what you think, like, it's not a list where I have all the risks written down. No. It's actually a list that makes me test whether I have thought about everything. Because when I want to look for risks, I have to really search for risks everywhere. So when I write this checklist, for example, one item on the checklist could be to actually see if, that's why I gave you the risk breakdown structure that we're going to use later, is to see I have a risk identified for every item on the risk breakdown structure. If I have identified one risk for every item on the risk breakdown structure, it means my work is really complete. I really have done my work well. So this is one item that would be on the checklist. Now these checklists, of course, are very important because they're going to be saved and they're going to become part of the organizational process assets of the project. Okay? Then we have the information gathering techniques. Now what does that mean? It simply means now I want to get the list of risks that you have identified. How are we going to identify risks? The first thing we can do is brainstorming. Now, if I tell you, okay guys, and we're going to do an activity later on like this, we want to identify risks for this project. So we sit and we brainstorm. Everyone will contribute with their ideas and talk about or give us the risks that you think our project could be exposed to. So this is brainstorming. And then after we get all the risks or we gather the information, we can categorize it. Now, the second technique is the Delphi Technique. Now, Delphi Technique, instead of the team, just the team meeting face-to-face like we're sitting here, it's related to experts. We have experts. Experts could be people from the project team or from outside the project team. Now, these experts, now what happens if you put experts together? Do you think they will definitely agree, or there might be clashes?
No, what if people disagree on this risk ratings or categorization?
Yes, this is a good question. Can I answer this later? Because it really pertains to what we're going to do later.
Okay.
Thank you. So now we're talking about the Delphi Technique. We have experts. We don't want to put them face to face because this might create clashes. And if not, they might be biased. Okay, they might hear the opinion of someone else and then be biased. So we send an email to these experts. We send them a questionnaire that they would answer, or we would ask their opinion on something. And then when we get the answer, there's a third party who studies the results. And then they would send another and another and another questionnaire until everyone agrees, until we get consensus on an issue. So this is the Delphi Technique, and it's very widely used. It's very good because no one, and the important thing is it's anonymous. It means once I send you the email, when I send your reply for someone else to add on to or to see what they think about, your name will not be there. It's anonymous. So that's very important. Delphi Technique, anonymous, and they're not sitting face to face. Interviewing. Of course. I want to see what are the risks for my project. I come to Murat and I say, look, I have this project I want to do. What do you think? What are the risks involved? Can you tell me?
Sure.
Yes. So he will give me some information and he will tell me, maybe there's this and that risk. You know, you have to be careful. So I ask him. Maybe I could, if I'm not so convinced, or I want to be sure about everything, I would also go and interview the experts. Again, the experts are very important. And I could go and interview them. Now, while interviewing, I could apply the root cause identification. For example, I would say, okay, what is the risk? The risk is A. Why is this risk going to happen? They would give me the answer. I would say, why? But why? Why? Again and again and again. Now, I may ask, on average, after 5 whys, I would really get to the root cause of the risk. Okay? So this is another method, another tool and technique, which is the root cause identification. And then we come to the Swot analysis. I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's very popular. The Swot analysis is where you analyze the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. Now, if you analyze your strengths and weaknesses, it means you will know where your strengths are to enhance opportunities. And if you analyze your weaknesses, you will know what are your weaknesses to avoid threats, which is negative risk, right? Now, an example of the SWOT analysis is actually constructing a commercial building complex. Let's say I'm an organization. I want to construct a commercial building complex. The strength is you can say, we have a lot of building experience. Strengths, good. The weaknesses or the weakness is, but our experience lies in building private homes and not commercial buildings. So this is a weakness. Opportunity, what is this going to do to us? This is going to make us grow into the market, and it will differentiate us from other organizations that actually do the same business as us, which is building private homes. And what is the threat? The threat is the resources might not actually get acclimatized or might not like their new environment. Okay, so this is an example of SWOT. And the other tool and technique is assumption analysis. You remember I said whenever you start a project, you start with an assumption. Assumption analysis is very important because it has to be true. It has to be accurate. Let's say I want to start a project on the assumption that my staff will all be trained in a new technology 2 weeks before the project. And I go on with the project. Now, do you think that there's a risk here? Yes, there is a risk because I assume that my staff are all going to be trained. What happens if I do not get the chance to train them all? What happens if the learning curve extends to a month or two after the training? And I will have started my project, and this is going to delay all the project and disrupt all my plans. See, so assumption analysis is very important. Now I come to diagramming techniques. These are very important as well as tools and techniques. We have first the cause and effect diagrams. Cause and effect diagrams are very famous. If you want to know what are the causes to something, you have to go and draw a cause and effect diagram. It's also called Ishikawa diagram because Mr. Ishikawa is the one who made it popular. And it's also called by a very nice name. It's called the Fishbone Diagram. If you look at it, we have the head of the fish here. This is the effect. And these are the causes feeding into this effect. It's the fishbone, look. Okay? Now, in classical, this is if you look at it, we have these that are the categories under which we're going to look for causes. We have a computer downtime here. So what are the causes for this? The causes could be in the users, or in the software, or in the hardware, or the environment. If I'm talking about the users, there might be misapplication of software, lack of training, misuse of hardware, abuse of hardware. Now, this is a simple, really, fishbone diagram. Things can get more complicated. I'm going to give you now cause and effect diagram where I only put, and I want you to do it in pairs, I only put the effect, which is there are late deliveries, late pizza deliveries during weekends. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you these sticky notes. I would like you to put the categories, the 4 categories. It's not going to be the same as this, of course, but you work them out. I want you to put the categories, the 4 categories, and then under each category, you're going to find 2 causes. Just stick them where you think they would go. I want to see who's going to be faster. So just spread them like this so that you can read them all. You have to give them some. Come on. Involve your pen. So just remember. Tell me when you're done. It shouldn't take long. Yeah, I can see something there that's good. Right, I think you've done that very well. So I'm going to show you the actual fishbone diagram, and I'm going to be able to see that I made it very simple. So of course we have the categories, which you all got: people, machinery, methods, and materials. For people, you have people don't show up, or drivers get lost. Now I could go further into that. Why do people not show up? because first of all, there's high turnover, because of low pay, and no teamwork, no training, okay? I do the same for machinery, methods, and materials. And what do you see as being the cause of most of the problems? The things that are in the circles, what are the causes here? No training, high turnover, poor training, high turnover, lack of training, high turnover. So really, the highest one, the most frequent one is the training, right? Is it the training or the turnover? Let's see. It's the training. So we have identified the cause of the problem. Either poor training or no training. Isn't that wonderful? And now what you can do with that actually is, whenever you have a problem and you solve it and you find that the problem comes back, you have to think about doing a cause and effect diagram, because you will find the root cause. Okay, another diagramming technique that we use is the flow chart. Now, flow chart is very simple. It's just a matter of having boxes and going from one box to the next, and sometimes you have to make decisions about yes or no. For example, if you're working in a company or in an organization and you get a bill to be paid, what do? Before you get the bill, you get it stamped with a receipt date, you review it, you enter it into the system, and when you get the okay for payment, you pay it, right? That's exactly what the flow chart is. Why is it useful in risk identification? It is useful because it shows me that in every box, each operation could go wrong. There are risks in every operation you do, in every step you do, okay? And the third diagramming technique is something called the influence diagram. This is mostly used for decision making, because when you make decisions, you start usually with values or objectives. You have your objectives. You would have uncertainties, right? When you want to make a decision about something, you have uncertainties. You're not sure about some things. So the relation between these elements, objectives, uncertainties, and finally making decisions, this is what is shown in the influence diagrams. You see these arrows going up and down? Okay, you don't have to think very hard about this, but just think about it. What is the influence diagram? Swot analysis we talked about, and the last technique is the expert judgment. I cannot stop repeating the word experts because experts are very helpful for us. So we can identify risks directly by speaking to experts who have already had experience with similar projects. Okay, what is the outputs of risk identification? There's one single output, but it's so important. It's called the risk register. And identified risks, I have the list of potential responses. It means I write, if this risk happens, what am I going to do? I could have a list of potential responses. We have root causes of risks also, and risk categories. Like you categorized here, you saw we have many categories. We can categorize also when we want to identify risks. And categorization helps us a lot for risk identification and qualitative analysis that we're going to do later on. Right, so now you did the whole process of risk identification. And one thing that people fear, and of course you know Fadi, and feel jumpy about or not happy about, is the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So now that we did it, I'm going to give you some, let me call them cards or labels that you're also going to do in pairs. So you can give me these. Would you like to keep these? You can keep them. Okay, you can keep them. So just put them to the side because we need some space. Now I'm going to give you everything related to identify risks, and you're going to separate them, sort them out into input, tools and techniques, and outputs, or output for this one. You really have to spread all of them so that you know how to pick up. Do you want me to put the papers to the side?
Yes.
So are we done? What is the easiest part of this job? Tools and techniques is the easiest?
Yeah.
Is it not the output? Yeah, because there's only one output.
Tools technique is the easiest one.
Oh, that's good if you found it easy. Very good. Remember what we said about inputs, that they're all project documents. Tools and techniques are the methods or the ways that you use to. Yes, and it's there as well. We have to, that's how it's in the bin book. We have to put as it's in the bin book. Okay, excellent. I can see that you're nearly done. So if we go back and have a look at our inputs, here they are. We start with risk management plan, activity cost estimate, activity duration, scope baseline, stakeholder register, cost management plan, schedule management plan, quality and human resource management plan, project documents, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. And then we move to the tools and techniques. Remember, we started with documentation reviews, information gathering techniques, checklist analysis, assumption analysis, diagramming techniques, SWOT analysis, and expert judgment. And then we went to our output, which is the what? Risk register. Okay, great. You did a good job. Excellent job, actually. Right. Now we are going to move to perform qualitative analysis. Now we've identified our risks. We have our risk register that I'm going to hand on to you soon. And this is going to be very exciting because you're going to be working with this. Now we want to move to the qualitative risk analysis. What is qualitative risk analysis by definition? It includes the methods that I use for prioritizing the identified risks. Okay, I've got the list of my risks. I've got to put them in order of priority. Why do I need to prioritize my risk? Because I need to focus on them in order to get good performance on my project. So, it includes methods for prioritizing the identified risks for further action. What is the further action, do you think? Such as quantitative risk analysis or risk response planning. Okay? Remember, we had the qualitative and then quantitative and then risk response planning. Of course, organizations can improve their project performance effectively by focusing on high priority risks. Now, what are the inputs to the qualitative risk analysis? The risk management plan, you remember I talked about this, I said what's inside the risk management plan. But what's inside or what's in the risk management plan that is related to qualitative analysis is that the plan has definitions of the levels, various levels of probability and impact. Because qualitative analysis is I want to see what is the probability of a risk happening, and if it happens, what is its impact, right? In order to rank it, to prioritize it. So, the risk management plan tells me the various levels of probability and impact, and it shows me a probability and impact matrix, okay, that we're going to use now. And most important in the risk management plan is that it has the revised stakeholders' tolerances, which may influence the final priority of a risk. What does it mean, stakeholders' tolerances? Now, stakeholders, of course, are everyone who is affected by the project, whether positively or negatively, right? So, if a stakeholder has low tolerance for a certain problem, then, or risk, for a certain risk, he will rank it high or low. He doesn't have tolerance to it, so he's going to rank it high. For example, you would get a stakeholder who thinks that customer dissatisfaction is totally unacceptable. So to him, he would put this as a priority. He will rank it highly because it's important to him. So really here comes the factor of when you want to assess qualitatively, there's the human factor in it, okay? I may think this way, you may think in another way. So this is how things go. So revised stakeholders' risk tolerances are there in the risk management plan. I also talked about the risk register. There's a scope baseline that we talked about before. We have to review again the scope statement and the assumptions and everything. I talked about the enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. The tools and techniques are the risk probability and impact assessment, probability and impact matrix, risk data quality assessment, risk categorization, risk urgency assessment, and expert judgment. Let's see what these mean. Now, risk probability and impact assessment is simply, you do two things. First, you assess the likelihood of this risk taking place. How do you assess it? Okay. Now, in project management, they decided that they would go on a scale from 0 to 1. So you have 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, up to 0.9. And the way you would do it is, usually, you could get your team to sit, but you need the experts here to tell you what values to give to a certain risk, really. What is the probability of this risk happening? And also, what would the impact be? So, and you record them. This is what it's all about. So, the probability and impact matrix is really a lookup table. It's a lookup table where you have values here. They have not written them, but we've got the results. After they write the values here, see, it's first of all, it's split into two parts. We have the positive risks to the right, and we have the negative risks to the left. And the parts that are in dark gray here, these are the high priority risks, okay? The ones that are in lighter gray are the medium importance, medium priority, and the lighter ones, the lightest, are the low priority. Now, when we get to very low priority risks, we don't even need to really put them on here. We can just put them somewhere called a watch list. Okay? So we'll talk about this later on. So now you know what a probability and impact matrix is. Now, also, the tools and techniques, we have the risk quality assessment first. That's very easy. It means I want to assess the quality of my data. I want to know, is my data correct? Is it accurate? For example, I have this data or information. Did that happen in 10 previous projects or just one? If I need more data, I have to go and get it. I have to go and ask people. I have to go and find some more resources to make sure that I have the quality I want. Now, risk urgency assessment, you know that some risks can be urgent, right? It means they have to be taken care of as soon as possible. But does that mean that only high priority risks are urgent? No. You might have some high priority risks, but you don't need to attend to them soon. For example, if the supplier who gives you material for your project is going to go out of business in about 4 months, let's say, you don't have to worry. You still have 4 months. Please, what you see here is on the first page, we have a project and we have identified the risks, as you can see them here. Yes, this is the first page. Yeah, you can see the risks on the first page from 1 to 6. You have the probability and impact of the risks, and then you have the probability and impact matrix. What I want you to do is to go to the second page, which is the risk register. Just put them side by side. I want you to fill in the information that is missing in the risk register. Right, we got to the outputs of the perform qualitative risk analysis, but before I do this, I'd like to answer your question that you asked me a few minutes ago, or when we were talking about the identifying risks. You asked me what happens if we don't agree on the ranking of the risks. Now this is normal. You remember we said there's a human factor here? Let's say I work on a project and the part of the project where I work is where the risk is. So how would I grade it? High or low? Of course I'm going to grade it as high priority. This is what happens usually. But the correct way of doing it is that we should think from the perspective of satisfying the overall goals of the project. And this way, my ranking would be accepted by others in the project. Let's say we still do not agree. What shall we do? Go to an expert, and he will help us. So thank you for that question. That was a good question. I'm going to continue now. This is the risk register updates. What am I updating for this risk register? I know now you filled in all the information about the project that we have here. You wrote what are the potential responses, what are the root causes. You also filled in the priority by looking at the priority impact matrix. And then you wrote about the urgency. So you filled in this risk register. This risk register has to stay with you till the end of the project. Whenever you have a project, you come back to it all the time, whenever it's time for a review, so that you add in more information. What do you add in? First, you make updates to the relative ranking or priority of project risks. You always update them. Maybe they become lower risk. Or you could have other risks jumping into the forefront. You can group risks by categories. So what happens if we group risks by categories? Let's say you have 3 risks in the training category and in the training, and you have 3 or 4 other risks in the equipment. Now, instead of taking care of 7 risks, wouldn't it be better to take care of 2 categories, each one containing the 3 or 4 risks? Of course. And also, when you have, let's say you have 4 risks, the cause of which lies in the maintenance, for example. So if you treat the cause for bad maintenance, you would have treated the 4 risks altogether. So this is the importance of categorization. Whenever you add a category to a risk, it means you have updated the risk register. Of course, we update with the causes of the risk that we have to take, of the areas requiring particular attention. We also write the risks that need to be taken care of soon we list risks for additional analysis and response. Whenever we send a risk to the quantitative analysis, we have to document this in the risk register. So this is an update. We have our watch lists of low priority risks. We, as I said, when you have risks of very low priority, you put them on a watch list. So whenever you put a risk on the watch list, this is also updating the risk register. And you would also look for trends in qualitative risk analysis results. What are trends? Like, for example, you notice suddenly as the project's going and as you're reviewing your risk assessment, you might see that there's a category that contains some risks and that is in the watch list. Suddenly these risks are growing and becoming a reality. They're realizing. So what do? You've noticed the trend. What should you do? You should go to that category and try to analyze it in detail, because we want to track all the risks. Okay? So this is what we mean by updates. And this is the output of the performed qualitative risk analysis. Okay, what we're going to do now is a final activity. هلا راح نكمل الاكتيفيتي بالعربي لانه نحن كلنا بنحكي عربي اكيد. فيلي بدنا نعمله هلا انه بهيدي الورقه البيضاء نحن منظمين رحله على الامازون رين فورست اللي بامريكا، وبدنا نعمل identification of the risks. بدنا نشوف شو المخاطر الموجوده. اول شيء حنعمل لسته فيهم، بعدين بدنا نشوف شو البرايورتي تبعيتهم، نعمل لهم رانكينج. اوكي، we're going to categorize them، نعمل لهم فئات نحطهم بكاتيجوريز. هلا كل ريسك بتكتبوه بدكم تقولوا لي اياه، وحسب خطوره الريسك اذا كان الريسك عنده هاي برايورتي حتسحبوا قطعه او بلوك خشب من هيدي الجينكا بلوكس وتحطوها فوق. اذا كان الريسك عنده ميديوم برايورتي بنسحب من النص، اوكي، بنحطها فوق. اذا لو برايورتي بنسحب من فوق تقريبا وبنحطها فوق. بدنا نشوف شو قديش رح يضل معنا هالتاور، قديش رح يطلع لفوق. اذا كانت هالتريب كثير مخيفه بتصور انه رح نسحب كثير من تحت. بس كمان هون بنرجع هلا هون للهيومن فاكتور. يمكن واحد اذا شاف سنيك، شاف حيه، ما يكون عنده مشكله، يمكن يعتبرها ميديوم ريسك او لو. واحد ثاني اكيد حيعتبرها فيري فيري هاي ريسك. اوكي، فاذا خلينا نبلش. يلا تلمي شو بتعتبروا اول شيء؟ let's identify the risk. شو هن الريسكس يلي المخاطر الموجوده بهيك رحله؟ سنيكس. طيب اوكي، only one hand. use only one hand. يد واحده بتستعمل. سوري، انت اعتبرتها انه هيدي عندها برايورتي عالي كثير، عملت لها رانك، خلص ما في مشكله، ممكن تسحبها وتحطها فوق عادي. ثانك يو. سو حتكتب على الريسك ريجستر تبعك سنيكس. بدك تكتب لي شو الريسبونس اللي لازم تعمله مشان السنيك. شو لازم تعمل كوقايه من هالخطر.
maybe try to be full cover.
فيك تحكي عربي يا احمد؟ عم نحكي بالعربي.
مش عارف، بس يعني اكيد ممكن معرفش.
يعني شو بنلبس مثلا حتى اذا مشان
يعني
سنيك؟
على حسب الافلام اللي شفناها انه لما استعمال يعني اشياء من البيئه زي مثلا التين، بتدهني جسمك بيه العفه ما راح تشوفك.
تين؟
التين
التين سوري يا اوكي. بس يمكن اكثر شغله معروفه انه بنلبس بوت عالي او صح؟ عشان ما يجوا علينا السنيكس. طيب جود، هيدا كتبنا الريسبونس والبرايورتي. فهمنا انه بالنسبه لك هيدي هاي برايورتي ريسك، هذا كثير عالي عندك. اوكي اكسلنت. مين بحب يعطينا ريسك؟
ممكن الامطار والجو، يعني الجو السيء.
طيب اكيد نحن رايحين على رين فورست، معناتها في امطار كثير.
انا بالنسبه لي بتخيل انها رح تكون يعني ميد ايمن هي
one hand only one hand. يد وحده. صعبه؟
صعبه. راح يد التاور كله.
ما تهدوا لانه بدنا نروح على الرحله.
لا.
شو اللي صار هون؟ طيب اوكي، حطها جنبها علشان ما يقع بسرعه. اوكي، انا عم بلاحظ انه انتم عم بتحبوا تروحوا على الرحله وبدكم تحافظوا على البروجكت انه it's feasible. You think it's feasible. بيمشي. اوكي جود. شو عندك ريسك؟
الحشرات والامراض اللي ممكن تنقلها زي الملاريا زي غيرها.
طيب
هاي بالنسبه لي انا برضه ميديم، بعتبرها ميديم.
تعتبرها
لو يعني
ميديم للو
يعني.
طيب اوكي شكرا جود. سو حتكتب على الريسك ريجستر تبعك انه الحشرات. طيب شو الريسبونس او لك شو بنعمل بالنسبه لهالموضوع؟
في بعض المستحضرات الصيدليه ممكن زي بعض الكريمات ممكن تدهنيها على جسمك بتبعد عن الحشرات.
اوكي ثانك يو. هذا الريسك ريسبونس وعرفنا انه هي ريتد يعني صنفها وسط الى منخفض. نعم شو عندنا الريسك صار؟ ممكن نفكر ب
ممكن مثلا قطاع وسائل الاتصال.
الاتصالات. انه يكون اتصالات مقطوعه مثلا.
هي
ممكن جدا يكون ما في اتصالات. طيب شو اولك هذا الريسك؟ كيف بتعتبره؟ خلينا نحذر شو رح يعتبرها الريسك. اوكي تقريبا هاي برايورتي ريسك I would say. طيب شكرا. طب شو الريسبونس اللي فيك تعمله مشان هذا الريسك؟
والله انا اعتقد لا في اجهزه الكترونيه حديثه يعني ممكن تستعمل شحن الموبايلات شحن اللابتوب. يعني ممكن الواحد يبقى معاه اكتر من جهاز من الاجهزه الالكترونيه دي بحيث ان هو يقدر يتواصل حتى من خلال الانترنت من خلال
طيب جيد جدا. اوكي نرجع اجين. نحن تذكروا انه نحن حنضل مكملين حتى يخلص الريسكس او يقع التاور اذا بدكم. احمد وات ريسكس؟ شو الريسك اللي فيك تفكر فيها؟
يعني الريسك بفكر فيها بس الرحله كلها ريسك بصراحه.
الرحله كلها ريسكي. لا بدنا نروح. اذا ما وقع التاور لازم نروح.
ايه تاني ممكن مبقاش ممكن الواحد يخاف منه؟
انا بفكر مثلا حيوانات.
اعطينا شي حيوان مثلا ممكن تلاقيه بالرين فورست بالامازون.
زي في فود هناك وحاجات كده.
لا حيوانات مفترسه.
في جاكورز هناك.
جاكورز فيري جود. في عندنا جاكورز.
بس دي برضه
هذه شو الريسك تبعها؟ انت خايف من الاول.
انت شكلك بدك تهد التاور.
بدك تهد التاور.
بس يعني اكيد ممكن ناخدها بتاع عشان مش هزعل كويس.
والله شجاع انا اعتقد. يعني اعتبرتها هاي تو ميديوم.
بالظبط.
هو لازم بايد وحده كنت يا احمد.
يعني انا كنت خايف عليها بصراحه ما تقعش بس.
طيب شو الريسبونس اللي فينا نعمله تنواجه الحيوانات المفترسه مثل الجاكورز؟
لو احنا مثلا خايفين في مكان ممكن بقى نولع نار حواليه. نخاف.
اوكي. سو فيك تكتب الريسبونس انه لايت فاير. اوكي فيري جود. شو عندنا هسه ريسكس ممكن نفكر فيهم؟
تماسيح.
فيري جود. عندنا التماسيح الاليجيترز. بالنسبه لك شو هدول؟
نفس جايبرز.
انا بستغرب انه مش كثير خايفين. طب منيح اذا الجاكورز والتماسيح ما خوفوكم انه تو جو رايت تو ذا بوتم. منيح اوكي. ثانك يو. شو الريسبونس اللي ممكن نعمله؟
تو افويد المناطق اللي بتكون كثير قريبه من صفحات المياه.
اوكي
نبعد عنها.
طيب
كيب اواي فروم.
اوكي طيب يلا لساتنا ماشيين كثير قوايا.
ممكن يكون عندنا نقص يصير بالطعام بالحديد بالامور هاي يعني ممكن ما تكون في امور صالحه للاكل في
اكيد جيد جدا. يعني حيكون في خطر على الصحه صح؟ او يمكن ما تكون نظيفه.
بالضبط.
طيب فيري جود. شو عندك الريسك؟ شو بتعملنا رانكينج له؟ اوكي فاذا اعتبر الريسك انه هاي برايورتي تقريبا هاي تو ميديوم. اكيد يعني نفس الريسك تبع الجاكورز. هلا انتم الجاكورز انا ما بعرف اذا موافقه معكم يكون هون بس بتشخصكم تحت لانه قصه موت او حياه.
كان افويد.
بدكم تكونوا يعني ايه اوبتيمستيك متفائلين. اوكي
احد الاخطار هذا اللي هو بالنسبه لي يمكن يعني عدم وجود العصابات وبعض المهربين موجودين هناك، وهي موجودين في كثره اللي هم تجار السلاح وتجار
يعني قطاع طرق اذا بدكم او الناس اللي عايشين بالغابه نفسها مخيفين.
خلاص
هاي الصراحه.
شكرا جزيلا.
بالايد واحده بس يا مراد.
مش عم تطلع بايد واحده.
لو
ما هي ما هو لازم بايد واحده مشان حتى نخلص. انا I can see the one اوكي انا كنت شايفه اللي في النص فيك تشوف. اوكي طيب شكرا لكم. شفنا هون انه كل ما زادوا الريسكس على البروجكت بالاخير رح يقع، واللي صار انه هو اخذ الريسك كثير برايورتي عاليه، فطبعا نزلت التاور. هلا كان ممكن كمان لو كملنا ممكن نلاقي ريسكس ثانيين صغار يكونوا كثير صغار ونحاول كمان نحطهم فوق، ممكن كمان يوقعوا التاور. كانت كثير حلوه. بس بدي اسالكم السؤال هلا، نحن اذا بدنا نحكي عن كاتيجوريز، كم كاتيجوريز انتم حكيتوا الريسكس اللي اعطيتوني اياهم؟ فيكم تحطوا لي تايتلز كاتيجوريز بيقعوا تحتهم؟
كل الحيوانات
فاذا عندي الحيوانات المفترسه
هاي environment.
بالنسبه للرينز يعني
هي
الطقس فينا نقول طقس اوكي جود. والحيوانات شو كمان؟ الكوميونيكيشن الاتصالات فيري جود. صار عندنا 3 كاتيجوري، وانت اعطيتني كاتيجوري رابعه
فود
هي الصحه بيقع تحت الفود والحشرات والملاريا. اوكي انا بحب اتشكركم، واكيد كنتوا بارتيسيبنتس كثير يعني كوبريتيف متعاونين، ونتمنى نشوفكم بالسيشن الثاني. شكرا.